Alright, y'all. We're going to do a quick lesson on chemical and physical properties, starting with physical properties. First, the definition. Any property you can observe without changing a substance's chemical makeup is what we would call a physical property. So the physical kinds of things that you can describe, right? Something's mass, something's color, its density, its smell, its height or width or depth, so any of its dimensions, or its solubility in water. Those we would all call physical properties. All right? Next, let's look at chemical properties. A chemical property is how a property that describes how a type of matter will change when exposed to other chemicals or other conditions. A chemical property is one in which you must change the chemical into a new substance to test for that property. So let's say that you want to know if something is flammable. Well, you can't test for whether it's flammable or not without setting it on fire. Therefore, that is a chemical property. Whether something is poisonous, you really can't test for that unless you actually eat it and see if it makes you sick. So those are 4 examples of chemical properties. Reacts with water to form hydrogen gas. Flammable, poisonous when ingested, corrodes metal. Those are all examples of chemical properties. Give me just one sec. I gotta get rid of some of these tools because they're getting in my way. All right, we have some further examples of physical changes. So you'll see in the note sheet, this is C on your note sheet. And we're first going to look at some phase changes. So these are 6 different phase changes. And I would like to review the names for these phase changes. You're first going to see here where we have their names and then a description in words of what's happening. And then you can also choose to use the graphic form to put in your notes where you can see where if you're going from solid here to gas straight up, if you do that without going through the liquid form, straight solid to gas is called sublimation. And if you go from gas straight to solid, what was that called? Let's look back and see. That is called deposition, where you go from gas to solid. Evaporation is where you go from liquid to gas. Condensation, from gas to liquid. Freezing, from liquid to solid. Melting, from solid to liquid. So there are all 6 of them from A through F. Okay, and here it is in graphic form again. So this is sublimation and deposition. Here's melting and freezing, right? So liquid to ice, that's freezing. Liquid to gas, that's evaporating. Gas to liquid, that's called condensing or condensation when it's noun. Okay, so make sure you have all those in your notes and you remember how to use those words. Here's a picture of sublimation. So what happened here is someone threw some solid carbon dioxide or CO2 into a warm bowl of water, and what we're seeing there is the sublimation of the solid carbon dioxide becoming a gas. And as it does that, we're actually seeing ice crystals form in the air. That's actually what we're seeing, which is pretty cool. CO2 is one of my favorite things, except for the fact that it's a greenhouse gas. We'll talk about that more later. Here are some other examples of physical changes. We've got dissolving, filtering, changing in shape and size. You can pound on something and make its shape change. That's just a physical change. You haven't created something new. You've just changed the substance's shape. You've made a physical change to it, but not a chemical one. All right, that ends the physical changes. Now we're going to get into some signs that a chemical change has happened. Okay? So a chemical change is when you've made something new. It has new chemical properties. And therefore, these should be some signs of these new chemical properties. So, when you mix some things together and you make a precipitate, which is a new solid that forms when the product can't dissolve in the water, that's a sign that you've made something new. Because that new stuff doesn't dissolve in water like the old stuff did. So precipitate is a new word for us, so I've defined it there. It's a new solid that forms when the product can't dissolve. I left a little space for you in the notes to write that out. Probably didn't leave you enough space. Sorry about that. Okay, the next sign of chemical change is a color change. In this case, we've got a new substance with a different color that is made. So when you see a color change, like clear to pink or blue to yellow, you know that a chemical change has occurred. The pretty telltale sign. All right, here's another sign of chemical change, and that is bubbles from a new gas that has formed. Now, bubbles are a tricky one because you have to keep in mind that bubbles can be from boiling. So that's not necessarily, bubbles appearing is not necessarily a sign of a chemical change, because bubbles can mean a liquid is boiling off, turning into a gas, right? That's not a new gas, that's the same gas. Water boils, it's still water. But we're talking about the bubbles forming from a new gas, and that is a sign of chemical change. Temperature change is also a sign of chemical change because the reaction that is occurring is creating new heat energy. So temperature change is another one. And finally, mass change. This is another tricky one. It's not just adding something new to the balance or taking something away. It's the idea that if you create a new gas, where is that gas going to go? Well, it's going to go out into the air because gases rise to fill their space. So the mass of what you made is going to be less than the mass of what you had started with. Or you might add the gas from the atmosphere into your reaction, and your product might weigh more. Either kind of mass change, either mass change increase or decrease, may be a sign of chemical change because of the addition or subtraction of a gas that is a new thing. Okay, so just to test your knowledge, what do you see here? What are some signs of chemical change that you might see in this picture? Kind of looks like we started with the red stuff and some green stuff, and we ended up with blue stuff. So that's color change. We've got some bubbles. That's a sign of chemical change. That's probably it. I don't see precipitate for sure forming. We could feel the flask to see if it's getting hot. That would be another sign, but we can't see that from the picture. So those are the signs that we can see from here. All right, thus ends the lesson. If I can get it to stop.